very good morning. Hope everyone is doing great. My name is Suchita Doshi, and today I'll be taking you through the journey of Ember. But before I do that, let me give you a quick introduction about myself. I work as a senior engineer at LinkedIn, and before LinkedIn, I worked for many different companies, but my very first Ember experience comes from Yahoo back in late 2013. After Yahoo, I worked for Apple, where I didn't do Ember stuff, but that was not for long. The love for Ember pulled me to LinkedIn, and here I am working on a lot of cool Ember stuff. Also, when I'm not on my working on my computer or I'm not doing any coding related stuff, here are the things that I love. I love playing guitar. Not a pro, but I can still play a little bit. I am a huge cricket fan. For those who don't know what cricket is, it's a sport which is very similar to baseball, and I myself play cricket, and it's very famous back in India. Of late, I have this craze of building my own custom mechanical keyboards with new switches and custom keycaps, etc. If any of you have any cool ideas, feel free to reach out to me. And I love watching movies. I mean, who doesn't, right? Okay, enough said about me. Now we should focus on the main topic. So today's agenda would be something like this. I plan to cover the journey of EmberJS in terms of its versions like version 1.x, 2.x and 3.x. Going forward, I'll be talking about Ember Octane and its native concepts, like some core concepts like native classes, Glimmer Components, templating and Octane, track properties, modifiers and decorators. After that, I'll be showing you a consolidated comparison of the classic syntax versus Octane syntax. And at the end, I will leave you guys with some documentation and references to migration guides and some information about Ember, Octane blogs, etc. Okay, so let's start with the journey of Ember. But before that, let's take a step back and think about around in 2013 times or so. Back in that time, we didn't have a lot of options in relation to JavaScript frameworks as we have today. The most evident options during that time were Backbone.js, AngularJS, Knockout.js, etc. While these were great, they still left the decisions of configuration on the developers. It was during that time when one framework emerged, which was built on the principle of the developers should not care about the configuration stuff. They should only focus on app-specific stuff, which means the developer's productivity would be increased because the framework would do the config-related stuff. The name of this framework was Ember JS. Ember has come a very long way ever since 2013, and let's see how it started with 1.x. So since 1.x was the very first version of Ember, it came with a lot of goodness. To start off with is convention over configuration. This was a whole new mental model shift for any developer who comes from a different JavaScript framework world. Especially I will give you my specific example. I came from Backbone.js background, and when I started working on Ember, it was very different for me. But as and when I started working on Ember, I started feeling the difference and I started appreciating it more and more because I started feeling more and more productive. So that was when I started falling in love with Ember. Also, Ember provided inbox built-in routing capability. So that means you don't have to write your own routing layer or get it from outside or something like that. It was already ready for you, which was a huge thing. Also, we had support for Ember data that took care of the state of the application, etc. And 1.x was built on view-driven architecture. What I mean is, here you can see the route controller view. That was the path that was the architecture that we followed at that time. And for anybody who wants a refresher of how we used to write Ember views, a sneak peek is in here, where computed properties were written somewhere like we annotated it with dot property, and observers were written something like where we added a dot observes to the properties. Also, we had the capability of two-way bindings, which was great because at that time it was really a dynamic thing for any framework to have this ability. And we had the support for attribute bindings. This was really good because let's say if you had a backing JS class for a template, like a component with a template or a view with a template, and you wanted to associate the attributes value dynamically. So with bind attr syntax, you can associate your components or views property directly on the template. So that is pretty good. Okay, so this was all good. Ember 1.x was really taking off and it was doing great, and complex web applications were starting to love it already. But the community always believed that there's always a room for improvement. So the lessons that they learned from 1.x and the new frameworks that were evolving during the time when 2.x was being planned out, they embraced all of these things together and added things in the roadmap of 2.x. So here are the few things that landed in 2.x. Instead of view driven, now we are component driven. This was because the web community itself was going in that direction, and Ember was hand in hand with that. So here you can see route controller component is the new way, and again a sneak peek of how the syntax changed. The computed property is now ember.computed, and observer is now ember.observer. Also, we had the Glimmer rendering engine in 2.x, which was a very, very good thing because it gave a dramatic improvement in the re-rendering of the application. It was pretty good. And then we had better binding attributes. Like you remember in the previous slide, I showed you the bind attr syntax, like you can see here as well in 1.x. But this posed some issues where it became an overhead and it was confusing and so on. With 2.x, it became more simplified, where you can directly add a property from your JS class onto the template without adding the bind attr. So that was nice. Also, the template scoping was improved. Let me show you an example. Here we have 1.x and 2.x again, a comparison, and I want to specifically talk about the second example in the 1.x section where we are iterating over the posts without any in. So here I am doing each post, and whatever is inside of that iteration loses the outside context, or it doesn't have access to the outside context. So you are stuck in that iteration itself. So as a workaround, the above example, like each post in post allowed you to do that, where the post would act as the inner context and then you can easily access the outer context. But in 2.x, things were way more simplified and standardized, where every time you want to iterate over a property, you use the as functionality, like each post as and then pipe, and whatever the parameter is, here it is post. So again, the post would be the inner context, and you can get the outer context as and when you wish. Also, while two-way bindings was great, it did impose some issues when your app started becoming more and more complex and more bigger. By that, what I mean is, let's say property A updates B, B updates C, C updates A again. So this kind of infinite cascading started becoming a problem. And that's why we started embracing the data down, actions up approach. And Ember 2.x was not just about all of this. It was way more than that. In 2.x itself, we had a roadmap towards things like HTML syntax for component invocation, routes to drive components. Like these are angle bracket invocations and routable components, if you might have heard already. That brings me to my next topic, which is Ember 3.x. This is very exciting. It has a lot of things. I'll mention a few of the things here, but there are many more things than this in 3.x. To start off with, it's cleanup, cleanup, cleanup. Why am I emphasizing on cleanup so much? Because a lot of cleanup has been done with this version, where a lot of private APIs, deprecations, everything has been cleaned up. In that way, the code, the framework becomes more manageable, maintainable, and more cleaner. Also, we have removed support for Internet Explorer 9, IE 10, Phantom JS, and also Bower. From now on, the other points I will be explaining more in details in the coming slides, so I'll quickly skim through these. 3.x has the ability for supporting native classes, Glimmer Components, angle brackets invocation, track properties, modifiers and decorators, and lots of documentation, which is a huge thing when you are moving forward with such a huge change. So that is a job well done by the folks. So what did we learn? We saw that framework emerged in 2013 and released 1.x, and then it improved more in 2.x, and then it improved even more in 3.x, and then here we are with the first new edition, Ember Octane. So you must be thinking, why is this a new edition and why is it not a new version? So you can think of edition as something that represents a shift in programming model due to new features and concepts added in the framework. Like for example, here we have a bundle of new features, a lot of documentation, a lot of toolings like code mods, etc. Everything bundled together. So that's why it's a new edition. So let's take a sneak peek of each or some of the key concepts of Ember Octane itself. Let's start with native classes. So Ember relies very heavily now on native class or native features of JavaScript. When I say it relies on native features, I mean there is very less framework specific code. And because there is very less framework specific code, the overhead on building the framework itself is very less. That means increased performance. And Ember is known for its steep learning curve. I mean, I've seen many folks who I've spoken to and where I read some blogs as well, where people choose not to use Ember because of its steep learning curve. And I can imagine why. But I think with Octane, that won't be an issue anymore because since now we have, again, I'm repeating, less framework specific code, so you don't have to learn a lot of things out of the box. So it gives you a smooth learning curve experience. Also, because again the same thing, it's more native stuff. It is more aligned with the JavaScript community, and you can share code more easily. And there is no more .gets. Can you imagine? Like me myself personally, I used to feel like, why do we have this? Like this .get foo, this .get bar. I'm sure a lot of you must be sharing the same feeling like I am right now. So there's no more gets. You just directly do this .foo, this .bar, like you usually do to invoke a property in your JavaScript currently. And of course, it is clean and easier to read. Enough said, let's see an example. So here in this example, you see on the top, we have this classic Ember object in syntax, and at the bottom, we have native syntax. Now, if you see, the main difference is how we are creating or defining the object. On the top, we are doing Ember object.extend, but at the bottom, with native class syntax, no more Ember objects. You can just say class person. That's it, you're done. Also, in the classic syntax, you can see the computed property full name is created by passing in the property's first name and last name. And we are invoking the first name and last name as this.get first name, this.get last name. Whereas in native class, we are just writing the native getters of JavaScript and then just adding a little splash of computed decorator on top of the native getter. That's it, you're done. You don't have to do this.gets anymore. It's this.first name, this.last name. So that's pretty cool. This was a little bit about native classes. Now let's move on to Glimmer Components. In my personal opinion, this is one of the biggest wins in Ember's journey so far because Ember's component library was pretty old, and with this new component library, it's a great refresher. Not only does Glimmer Components take all the goodness of native classes, but it also makes it more simplified component library in Ember. Let's talk about this following example again. So here, Glimmer component is defined by importing Glimmer component instead of Ember component, as you can see. And instead of exporting default component.extend like we do usually in our classic syntax, we just do a native class and then extends the Glimmer component. Also, there are now fewer hooks and properties. That is a great thing. Like Previously, we had 13 lifecycle hooks and 29 properties. Now, can you imagine a new person coming and joining, working on Ember, and you say, hey, if you want to be productive, if you want to start working and make an effect, you need to know 13 lifecycle hooks and 29 properties. That would be immediately daunting and overwhelming for anyone who comes across this. I think with this, with Glimmer Components, no more fear, because now we only have 2 lifecycle hooks and 3 properties. Also, you must be already knowing that every time you create a component in the classic component world, a wrapper is always wrapped around your template. Like for example here, the number of guests is just a value. But when it renders on the DOM, there will be a div, or in this case, there will be a label that will be wrapped around it. This might become confusing, and it has actually. I've had many people come to me and ask me, hey, I'm just rendering this template. What is this new div that is being wrapped around it? I'm not even adding it in my template. And then I had to explain them the reason why. But with Glimmer Components, it's what you write is what you get, or what you see. Here you can see very well in the bottom where I'm wrapping it around with the label tag itself. So I'm not doing anything special in my class. Rather, I'm just writing everything in my template itself. So that is amazing. Also, it's important for us to identify what things are local in our component and what things comes from outside. With the classic components, there was no way to do it, because I can see here this dot number of guests and this dot max guest. They both are this dot and this dot. There's no way for you to know which is a current one and which is a local one and which is coming from the parent context. But if you see in the Glimmer component case, this dot args dot max guest. So I know now for a fact that max guest is coming from somewhere outside. So it's from a parent context. So that is a great way to identify what is the point of origin for any particular property. So this was a little bit about Glimmer Components for you guys. Now let's talk about templating in Octane. Now there are a lot of good things that have come in the world of templating for Octane. Let's start with angle bracket syntax. Now this angle bracket syntax is a dramatic simplification of API. Like let's say for example in this example we are seeing in classic templating, we are invoking the component using the curlies, but in Octane we are invoking the component using the normal HTML syntax, which is angle bracket. So now it's very easy for me to understand which thing is coming, or which thing is a component, which thing is a helper, which thing is a property. Whereas before it was very hard for me to understand right when I see it from the first go. Also, with angle brackets, we have something called as named arguments. Named arguments are a way where in the previous slides we saw this dot args. It is similar to that, but in the templating side, where it helps you understand where is the origin of your property coming from. For example, in here on the top, everything has no context whatsoever. You don't know where the employee name is coming from. You don't know where the employee ID is coming from. But in the bottom, it's very clear. Like for example, the employee ID, when I'm prefixing it with the @ symbol, I know that it is coming from an outside context. So now I can understand that, okay, this is a passed in arg and not something local to my JavaScript class. Also, a good thing to keep in mind is on the left side, like on the classic templating side, on the left side we have name, emp ID and add employee. Now it's hard to understand whether this thing is part of the HTML attribute or is it a part of your component. But with Octane, it's very easy, because now everything that is pertinent to your component will be always prefixed with an @ like we have right now in here. Also, we have required this in the templates, like we have @ symbol for something coming from outside. We should know what things reside locally in your backing class. And that's where this dot employee name becomes very handy. Before, there was no way for me to know, but now I do. So it's a great way to make things very specific and very concise and very clear. So this was a little bit about templating in the Octane world. Now let's move on to track properties, my personal favorite. The reason being the simplification that it brings on the table, but beneath it is very strong. Let me start by going through the syntax real quick. Here you can see instead of computed property where I'm importing on the top, I am importing a track property from Glimmer tracking library. Then any local property that I want to listen to or that I want to depend on, I will mark it as tracked, like I'll prefix it as tracked in the track syntax. And then the magic happens. On the top, in classic syntax, you can see there's a computed property that is depending on first name and last name, whereas at the bottom, I'm not doing anything. It is a simple, plain JavaScript getter, but the magic happens now, where any property that is marked as tracked will make sure that any getter that uses that track property, and if there is any chance where the track property changes, it will make sure that it recalculates the getter and sends it back to the browser. So in a way, the functionality or the behavior would be similar to computed, but this is way better. Just imagine when you are writing a huge component class and you have several properties in your class, and if you have to depend on few of the properties here and there for multiple computed properties, there'll be so many computed properties in your class and it will be not very clean. But with this, you can just mark those or prefix those with track and just write your regular getters. That's all. So very clean and concise as well. Also, no more sets. Like in native classes, we had no more gets. Now we have no more sets. So no more this dot set foo set bar, or for example in here, this dot set count equals this dot get count. No longer all this confusion. Just do what you regularly do in your JavaScript. This dot count equals this dot count plus 1, and you're good to go. So that's amazing. So these are the few things of track properties, how it works and how it behaves. Now let's move on to modifiers and decorators. So what is a modifier? You can think of modifier as functions or classes that are directly applied to the template. Like it's applied directly to the element itself, like you can see in this example. On the button tag, I'm adding the on modifier itself, which is just doing some usual event handling with this dot increment. Now you must be thinking, why do I need to do this? I can currently with my did insert element hook, I can associate my event listener and I'm all good to go. But just think about it. You can do that easily with your top level element or your root level element for your component, but what about the child elements? You could still do it, but it will be a bit messy. Instead of that, modifiers allow you to target specific elements. So you can go in whichever elements you want to associate things with, you can just add the modifiers in there directly. And moreover, it also cleans up the code for you, and it also, cleans up the state and re-registers if any parameters change. So that is a great thing, and they are easy to reuse. So there are a lot of benefits of using modifiers over not using them. Now let's move on to decorators. What is a decorator? Now you can think of decorators as something that enhances the functionality of what it is prefixed on. For example, here you can see the increment function and decrement function has action decorator prefixed. Now just the increment and decrement functions are doing the job of incrementing or decrementing the counter, but with action decorator, it's doing more than that. It understands that, oh, now this function is becoming an action handler rather than just being one function. So that's how it enhances the functionality. So it's kind of an abstraction for the developer, but it adds a lot of value. So this was a little bit about modifiers and decorators. Now let's move on to the meat part. Now we will do the comparison between the classic and the Octane syntax. Now here on the left, very left side, you see there is a custom off label. That's what we are talking about right now. It is invoked using the curlies, like you can see on the bottom, with toggle label, and I'm passing in few arguments. And in the right, you can see the actual implementation of this component. All this is good. This is classic component. You can see a lot of things happening in the component class itself. When I move it to Octane, this is how it looks like. Now the template specific stuff is in template, the component specific stuff is in component, and you can see it is invoked using the angle bracket syntax. Let's go through it one by one. So right away you can see that the import is different. On the left, on the classic side, we have Ember component, and on the right side we have Glimmer component. Next, we are no longer doing the classic component syntax. Like on the left we see component.extend, but on the right we see native class syntax, and then we are extending from Glimmer component. Then no longer implicit wrappers. On the left I am overriding the tag name with label, but on the right, if you see at the right bottom, the label element is being enclosed in the template itself. Also, any template specific stuff goes to template itself on the right in Octane part, but that's not happening in the classic. We are still doing attribute bindings and class name bindings in the JavaScript class. Also, a few things to note. On the left side in the classic syntax, we have a property called isAwesome and a label value computed property that depends on that, and then we are invoking it using this.get. But on the right instead, we are prefixing it with tract, the isAwesome, and then we are just using a normal regular getter and no longer this.get. It is just this.awesome. Next thing to check is on the left we see that we are depending on a property called value, but I don't know really where this value is coming from. But on the right, it's very evident that it's coming from this.args.value. That means it's coming from a parent context. So easy to understand. Also, on the left, we can see that we are handling the click handler on the left by writing the click handler in the classic syntax. But on the right, we are using the on modifier to make sure we are hitting on the element itself, like registering it, and then handling it using the actions decorator. So this was a little sneak peek for you to give you guys the feel of how it was before, how it is now, how simplified and how good the separation of logic has happened now, and I hope it gives you a good understanding of what is coming forward. As promised, here are a few reference and guides where it would help you to migrate your current existing Ember app to Octane, like with these code mods. We have a lot of code mods in this link that you can follow. The folks have done a lot of hard work and it is easily seen in there. Hopefully this will be a very smooth transition for you guys. Also, if you have any questions about migrations or migration order or something like that, Ember Atlas would be the right place for you to go, because it will give you the right amount of information for you to migrate very smoothly. And the rest are a few random information for you to dig down more deep into Octane and its key concepts and deep understanding about each concept. So this was it, guys. Thank you very much for patiently listening to my talk, and I hope all of you are as excited as I am for Octane, and I'll see you writing Octane right away. Thank you.